Well, we're back for another week of the OC Office Hour, where we talk about different things that we see in the game, some adjustments you can make, how we can make those practical all the way down to practice and drills. And joining me today is the offensive coordinator of the USFL Michigan Panthers, Eric Marty. Eric, it's great to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks, Keith. Really appreciate you having me.
Definitely. And as I told you before, when I finally got a hold of you, I have been trying to run you down. I've been following you here over the years. I think you do a great job, and you've shown that track record of doing a great job at every level. And we'll certainly have to have you back on the podcast in the off season to talk a little bit more about that journey and all the different things that you do. But today we're going to focus specifically on some of the games that we watched and go through some things here thematically. So we're going to start first with the quarterback. In week one, early in the season, you want that smooth operator on the field, and sometimes that means that maybe physically, as far as talent goes, that might not be the best guy. Talk to us a little bit about the thought process for you and why you take that approach.
As a coaching staff, you got to be aware of that and understand that sometimes maybe the quarterback competition is going to carry out into the earliest part of the year, because a lot of times coming out of camp, we end up gravitating towards the guy that is just able to run the system versus the player that maybe has a little bit more talent. So you got to weigh the pros and cons there. But ultimately, week one's more about not beating yourself than anything. So you got to make sure that from an operational standpoint, not just your quarterback, but your entire offense, you're able to go out, function, get lined up, avoid pre-snap penalties, and play sound football to give yourself the best chance to win early in the season.
When you're looking at that particular guy, and as you said, maybe this competition is continuing to play out here in the early season, what things do you see from a quarterback attribute standpoint that you say, yeah, this is the guy who we need to start the season with?
I think it comes down to his ability to communicate and control the offense. Is he a guy that can solve problems and put out fires at the line of scrimmage? Can he make people better around him by just getting information to where it needs to be? And so that's going to be a lot of it. If you have a guy that's just so good in the pre-snap process that he's going to be able to put out any fires and get you lined up and get things corrected if there is an issue, that takes a lot of pressure off some of your other young guys who may be trying to learn the offense or learn the system for the first time, or all of a sudden get out there and kind of big game, big moment, and maybe have some nerves. So if you have somebody that has that capability, that may elevate their status over maybe a younger player that has a lot of ability but isn't quite as comfortable getting the people around him lined up.
Confidence is a big thing early in the season, and it's the confidence of the quarterback, as you said, maybe that young guy who doesn't have the confidence yet, but it's also the confidence of the play caller. And I want to address both of those with you. So let's start with that guy you just mentioned, that very talented kid who maybe doesn't have the confidence, isn't operating smoothly yet, but you see the potential that this guy could really be something for us, maybe even this season. How do you approach that, and what's your plan, I guess, to really start to integrate him? Maybe it's little by little. I don't know if it's something that, hey, boom, it's week 3. You know what? This guy's taking your job. But an approach to that you start to work that guy in little by little, and to a point maybe where he does take over, or maybe that's his role for the season.
Yeah, I think first it's going to start with maybe that older or poised player. What's he able to do within the framework of your offense? If he comes out and lights it up, obviously, then you have your guy and you don't need to worry about it necessarily. But if you come out, maybe you're playing with the less talented guy and he's getting things done operationally, but you don't feel like you're hitting the ceiling of what your offense is capable, then I think you need to make sure you continue to rep and develop the two throughout the first couple of weeks of the season. Additionally, just putting him in a position to be successful, taking off some of the verbiage, window dressing, whatever, and simplifying the package you have for that too. There's no reason to put him in a situation where he's got to get multiple motions or some exact play calls when the strength of his game is just lining up and playing ball. So make sure you tailor it to that. And then also, I think, actually, I saw a blog that you wrote about how you evaluate quarterbacks and try and make sure it's a very defined process. And I think that also as a coach, you need to make sure you do a great job of defining what you're looking for out of your starter. So talent or no talent, I mean, here are the non-negotiables that we need out of our quarterback in order to play winning football within our offense.
Yeah, that was definitely something that was useful to us. And you bring up that article. And one of the things I did chart on those guys was their operations. And for us, a lot of times it was, I think a key indicator is, if you're a tempo team especially, and at the time we were, how quickly could he get the ball snapped and do that correctly. I mean, you get up there and snap the ball, but are you doing everything right? Did you go through your processes, etc.? And that was something we factored into it. Now, that's not always easy to track, even if you have your camera guys and you tell them to leave it on, leave that film on during practice so you can measure some of those things they usually forget. So we would just have somebody with a stopwatch and a chart, and it could be a backup quarterback, injured player, whatever, and they take care of each other. But we factored those things in too. And I do feel the real live game playing time is important. And when we look at our offenses, at whatever level you're at, I mean, your one is your one for a reason. There's not a lot of times where you do run into that situation where I got two guys who are as equally talented. Sometimes maybe one's better than the other in certain areas, but it is in your best interest, especially early in the season, to figure out a way to get those guys involved. And I can say there's been times when it's taken a lot of courage for me to pull the trigger and say, okay, this is your series. We planned for you to come in and get this one. And, you're looking at where we are we at in the game, et cetera. And I've moved it before. I've rolled the dice and have stuck with it before. But it was always one of those situations where if I was using that guy, I wasn't going to put him in a bad situation there. If it was maybe a critical time in a drive, I might not change him yet. He might get the next full-time drive. But what I really learned, and I learned this, I was out at Mount Union yesterday, and something I saw Larry Karras, Hall of Fame coach, doing all the time was he would play his second quarterback regularly. And he would do it, that's easy to say. Mount Union blows out a lot of people, but this was in meaningful time. This was early in the game. You'd always see that second guy go in, and there were times, where he's had that situation by the end of the year, that guy might become the starter in the national championship game. So having that plan is important, and I think you mentioned something there that you give him something that he can handle. And so, as I said, that's something I adopted, and we might have a situation where, and we did, my best quarterback was more that drop back guy. The guy who was next for us was a little bit more of an option runner type guy, maybe an RPO type guy, can do some different things. So we looked at what we do offensively and what can he do well to set him up for success. So there's a lot of things that go into it. I think rather than, I'm just going to stick this guy in right now, you have to really factor all those things in, and bigger than anything is make sure you practice it as well.
Well, I think the other thing that we have to be cognizant of as coaches is that until the lights come on, we don't necessarily know what we have in our quarterback, especially if it's a guy that hasn't played for us before. And we're kind of talking about playing the veteran guy that maybe isn't as talented over the guy that is younger and has more talent but isn't quite as well versed in the system. But it may be a situation that goes the other way. You may be starting the guy in week one that you think just has so much talent. He has to be on the field, and he looks great in 7-on-7. He looks great throwing routes on air, but all of a sudden you put him behind an offensive line he doesn't see in process, versus you put the guy in that sees in processes that maybe doesn't have the arm talent. He gets his chance to play, like you said, in the second quarter of week one, or however you want to try and manage that quarterback situation where you're giving multiple guys opportunities, and all of a sudden the game's moving slower and things look better for him. So I do think, like you said, there's a ton of value to getting multiple quarterbacks opportunities to play early in the year, especially if you're in a situation where you're not super familiar with your guys, whether it's new quarterbacks in the program because of transfers or being at the JC level where there's a lot of turnover. You just don't know what you have in a quarterback until the lights come on and it's game time.
Yeah, and that seems to be more and more the trend as we get into these different things that are happening, like the transfer portal. But you see it even at the high school level as well, as kids moving around a little bit. So, yeah, having a plan for that's important. And I think having a plan for yourself as a play caller is important as well. As we talk about quarterback confidence, we certainly want to do things to build their confidence. But I think it's like a 50-50 deal. That part of that is I want to call things I'm confident in that I know he can operate in. So when you think of that, what are some general things you look at to get that guy going early, get him in a rhythm early in the game, build that confidence in week one and moving forward?
To me, it starts with whether he's an older or younger player, experienced or not. Does he get the ball out, or do you need to find ways to get the ball out for him? And so the quarterbacks that I love playing with are guys that you call a drop back pass or a play action shot, and it's not there. The ball gets checked down, and you're in 2nd and 3, right? That's every coordinator's dream. Versus a guy you call quick game or drop back for, and it's pat, and we start running around. It turns into a scramble play. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's a lot harder to call plays for that guy and have confidence in that guy. So, again, is it a guy that you're going to be able to call your base stuff and the ball's going to get out and it looks like your offense should, or is it a guy that you need to help him get the ball out? When I say help him get the ball out, the perimeter screens, the called screens, the boot, the simple quick game, one read type throws or RPO throws, some of those things where, okay, let me help this young guy, not give him a ton to see or not make him play through multiple progressions from a pocket. Let me just give him the called things and we'll get it rolling like that.
Definitely. It's something that you saw Notre Dame use early in the game against Ohio State. I think their quarterback, who was a new guy, had 8 completions in a row or 6. It was something like that, but they definitely established that rhythm. Tommy Rees did a good job of calling plays that he knew the quarterback could be successful with. So there weren't a lot of intermediate throws or downfield shots, and there's a lot of quick game or screens, simple things, shallow routes or stuff like that as you think about the different concepts that you have, simple things that a quarterback can complete and start to have some confidence in. It's right. You want, related to basketball, you want your guys shooting some layups here before he starts chucking threes. And,
no doubt.
And I think that's something that I saw that Notre Dame did very well early on in the game. And, you mentioned those guys who are going to get out of the pocket, right, in those situations. On the defensive side, that's something you really need to account for, right? Those contained rushes. How many times do you see that quarterback in trouble and then, boom, he's out on the edge and not contained? At Ohio State, you saw that quite often now. I think The thing you saw in a composed C.J. Stroud was that his eyes were staying down the field still. He wasn't scrambling to run. He was scrambling to continue to throw, which is a skill you have to build in your quarterback as well. So let's talk a little bit about that idea, both from the standpoint of maybe, the defensive guys listening, some things you got to think about there, especially what you'd want to do against a young quarterback, but also how do you start to train that guy that when all of a sudden the bullets are flying and things are happening unexpectedly, when you are able to escape that, you still maintain your status as a passer? Yeah,
well, one caveat there, and I think you kind of hit on it with the Notre Dame game. You also have to factor in what your offensive line is capable of, because if you're playing in a game where there's a talent differential between what you have up front and the defense, especially the defensive line, or you're playing an elite defense like in Ohio State, you could have Peyton Manning back there, but if you're just going to call drop back, he's going to get snowed under and it's going to be some negative plays. So in addition to helping your quarterback kind of get acclimated with some early timing throws, those different things, also varying the rhythm and the launch point early in the season, early in the game, to really help your O-line get some confidence and get going. And I think that's something you see as well with, especially week one, is the quarterback comfortable in the pocket? Great. He'll make reads and throws. Does he feel like he's under constant pressure? And now it's what you just talked about, where guys are starting to bounce out of the pocket, and the good ones keep their eyes down the field. Other guys maybe don't, but you got to make sure that it's, you properly analyze how well your offensive line can play up front versus your opponent, and what things you're capable of calling, because there are going to be games where you just say, as much as I love all these drop back play action concepts and I think they're great, we're just not going to be able to hold up and read them out because we'll be under pressure. Yeah, definitely. And I think conceptually there's things you can look at that work well in your offense. There's a lot of things you can do to help an offensive line, whether they're lacking in talent or maybe they're outmanned from a physical standpoint. There's a lot of things you can do to help them, as you said, by moving the launch point. One of the great things, we've talked about it on the first time on this podcast, to Tony DeMeo, who was doing it forever at
Charleston was the quick naked, right? You're looking at
boundary
quick
hitch,
game, right? Boundary hitch, whatever. And if it's not there, don't force it. Get out, and now you're moving the other way. And, it's usually something a lot of teams have quick game. A lot of teams have that naked or that bootleg type of pass. It's just pairing those things together and figuring out how to do it. And I think the key thing is just figuring out who and how you block that edge. And there's some different ways you could do it with the back or just keeping your wing in and releasing the back out that way. But what I found in using that, the nice thing about it is it really does, as your quarterback's opening that way, those safeties aren't necessarily running to out leverage what's happening away from where he's looking. So you do get those opportunities coming back the other way where, running your naked concepts, whether that's a flood or, we would just take what we normally did, our normal rules. If that second receiver, sometimes we put him on just a slant, we call it the win route. If he didn't get thrown the ball, then he was just into an over route across the field. So a lot of things you can do there. Easy concept, definitely builds confidence both in the quarterback, the O-line, and probably you as a play caller as well.
Yeah, getting to some of just the yes, no, and now if it's not there, now I get a chance to sprint out, dash back to the field. Now I'm just playing schoolyard ball with my eyes and working through a progression and getting out of the pocket and feeling comfortable there. I think that's absolutely another really quarterback-friendly concept you can get to, especially early in the year.
Yeah, the screen game is another thing. You mentioned that, and I know one of the things you saw quite a bit was the screen and go, which is a great compliment. You think about, okay, if I am going to start my guy off and get him into a rhythm with screens and throw a lot of screens early, now having a shot play off of that, called at the right time is definitely something that's going to be an explosive for you. Do it the right way.
Well, I just think those are simple, explosive type concepts, or at least with the potential to be explosive, that early in the year, you want to do as many things that test defensive discipline as possible. And we also talked about empty and unbalanced and different things, but the screen and go is just one more element that, week 4, week 5, they've seen it and they've coached the heck out of it. But week 1, maybe they got in camp, maybe they didn't. And it can be a chance for offensively you to get a gimme if it hits, as far as just kind of getting a layup on a vertical shot.
So let's talk about that play a little bit conceptually, because it seems simple, but there's definitely some keys to the timing, the technique, how you're going to sell it. So what are the key coaching points you look at when teaching a screen and go?
Well, I think the teams that do it best are the ones that a lot of times it's 3-by-1 tempo into the boundary, and they've hit you with it a couple times. So now defensively, you feel panicked just to go match it, right? Especially if you're a quarters type team, you're trying to figure out if you want to get the nickel over there, and they've hit the boundary screen a couple times to hurt you, and now they got you scrambling. And now here comes the fake now, or the now from the outside receiver, and the stocking goes from 2 and 3, getting down the sideline, down the seams. I think that can be the best way. Another way I've done it on occasion, which can be a really quarterback friendly way, is you actually boot to it, and you boot to some sort of like now screen and number 2 fake blocks and goes. And now at least you're not asking your guy to see it and read it out from the pocket. Although I do think you can manufacture a screen and go that hits pretty quickly. That's not a super slow developing play. But, again, those are a couple different ways. I think the best way is to have that fastball and run a couple times in week 1, and then all of a sudden here comes the shot off it. But if you do want to move your quarterback, boot, maybe go 3-by-1, have the H-back or tight end secure the edge, back to the field. Number 1 runs the now screen. Number 2, fake block and go down the sideline. And you can also bring the backside X on the drag in case that isn't there. He's got a chance to work back to a late crosser.
And I did see that movement type of screen. I cannot remember who was running it, though. Did you see that this last weekend?
I may have seen it. I can't give you the team, but I want to say there was some sort of movement to one that showed up this week.
So that block and go guy, again, the sell is so important, and it's funny. You see people try to do this multiple ways. Some are very effective. Some are not selling it at all. But in coaching that guy up, in order to get him, again, the right time to the right place so you do have that big play, what things do you coach him up on?
I think the guy's got to have a little feel and savvy for it, but make eye contact, break down, and then you hope that guy has some ability to just separate. And this depends on your guy and your roster, but against good defenses and good defensive players, it's not like you're going to fool them into just jumping the now screen, getting a walk in. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to freeze their feet and trigger just enough that now you get a chance to get a step on them and beat them that way. So just getting in position, giving enough of a sell, enough of a breakdown that they get feet to freeze. And once they see the feet freeze and people start to trigger, okay, go and get your landmarks. And I think the critical coaching concept in all the double move type stuff is we always talked about we don't want a 15-yard penalty in a pass interference call. We want 6 points. So make sure you're really disciplined and physical, trying to avoid the reroute, trying to avoid the panicked, let me just take this pass interference call, be physical, get your shoulder down, avoid the collision, and let's go get 6 points.
The other thing you mentioned here as we were talking about this is some of those tough formations like formation into the boundary, rule-breaking formations that typically teams have one adjustment to, and ways that you can attack with those. I know you saw quite a bit of that here in week one.
Yeah, a lot of unbalanced 4-by-0 with especially the 11 personnel attached tight end. And I think Michigan hit a big play running zone read with the H-back slicing back to the side with no eligibles. Saw some of that, and then also a good amount of empty in week one, which just comes back to what you said. If it's a team that hasn't seen a bunch of empty, they probably have one, maybe two empty checks, and you feel like, okay, if we're going to get into some critical situations, let's jump in empty because they'll have less of a package to defend it, or always line up in empty and reload the back, and hopefully you get them to check to a really, really base look, maybe potentially in a critical situation where you don't want to get blitzed or something of that nature.
You mentioned some 4-by-0, some unbalanced. Unbalance definitely causes headaches for a defensive coordinator. If you do it right, I think part of it is personnel, right? Who's the extra guy over? Can he really make a difference for you in the blocking surface, et cetera? But types of things you saw out of some of those 4-by-0s.
Yeah, like I said, the one was the zone read going with the slice avoid guy coming back in the boundary. Also, it may have been a week 0 game. I'm trying to think who it was, but they had a play action double post look, and they got that corner to the 0 side down low, and they dragged them all the way across off that, which actually I had a lot of respect for that play call because you don't necessarily know how week 0 you're going to get it played, right? Week 2, week 3, you see somebody run that formation, you say, hey, this is how they're going to defend it. Okay, we can run that deep cross and get behind the corner off play action, but it takes a little more you got to be a little more brave to call that thing in week 0 and just try and read it out. So I thought that was a heck of a play call.
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit about a concept like that. Dan, Carroll, and I last week we saw in Nebraska and Northwestern. It might have been something in that game.
I'm pretty sure that was the game, absolutely.
Again, those formations, looking at those, number one, from the defensive standpoint, I know our defensive coordinators throughout the season just would have some kind of a period where they handle those, even if it's a walkthrough. I know one of my defensive coordinators called it funky formations period, and just working their alignments towards it. So defensively, you certainly have to have a plan. But from an offensive standpoint, I think what's interesting, if you can see some of those early, I think you can start to plan some packages. I know from my standpoint, when I was planning, I always like to start with the knowns and, okay, how are they going to line up? Not just how, but who are they going to line up in some of these certain formations that allows us to start at least the basis of a game plan. I always like to start with the knowns rather than, hey, we're going to plan this formation and we think they're going to do this, but we don't know. So just looking for those opportunities, I guess, as you game plan and you're reviewing film.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Kind of the way I start my process is just rolling through that formation cut up and how do they line up to this formation and do I like it? If the answer is yes, it's in the game plan. If I don't like what they are giving us versus that formation, then you get it out, for the exact same reasons you said. And so I think that's that becomes a really easy starting point. And I think you want to be able to show your players the visual when you talk about some of those unique formations or the reasons why you're putting things in. I think it gets hard if you're just kind of saying, hey, we're gonna inject this unbalanced or this funky formation that we haven't seen anything like it on tape, so we don't necessarily know, but this is what we think. And sometimes that vision doesn't always translate to the players, versus it's a lot easier to explain to them that the reason we're putting in the 4x0 unbalanced with the double post with number 2 being able to go all the way across the field is because they're going to nail down their corner. We know he's going to fit play action, and now we get a chance to read it out against a one high safety, et cetera, et cetera. So, just being able to communicate a plan to your players and the reasons why you're putting in some of those things, obviously, is a lot easier when you have visual plays to show them the reasons after week 1.
From a play calling standpoint, when you do plan some of those, when do you like to work those in? I know sometimes I would want to look at them in openers. Sometimes it might be as we settled into the game plan and maybe we're a few series in and we could use that. The thought might be, hey, we need a little bit of a spark here, or they've kind of settled in on what we're doing. And then I know there's been times where we've planned it for, let's pop this out in the second half. But what are your thoughts on using some of those things and when you do it from a strategy standpoint?
Off gut right now, I'd say a lot of people were calling them in kind of the high red zone plus territory off a turnover, because it was that turnover shot play. Just watching week 0 and week 1, I think, is when a lot of that stuff was showing up. Some of the unbalanced stuff, obviously, getting near the goal line makes sense because you're trying to manufacture run game in close quarters. But yeah, I think it can be all those different things you said, kind of circling back to what we were talking about initially, getting quarterbacks confidence early in the season, early in games. I mean, also as offensive coordinators, there's a lot of that. I mean, if you're going in with your third year senior starter, you're going to come out guns blazing, being wide open. But if you're starting a first year starter, how do you get that confidence, and how do you have the confidence not to just be run on every first down? And so, being willing to cut it loose. And I think it always helps when you're able to have a conversation with the head coach and kind of get that direction on how you want to attack as a program. Because I think sometimes as a coordinator, you're thinking, all right, as long as we don't throw a couple pick sixes and put the ball on the ground, we should have a chance here. And you get a little conservative accordingly, versus if you're on the same page with the head man and he's telling you to be aggressive early on downs and be aggressive in the game, I think that takes some of the weight off play calling off of you and allows you to call more of a wide open game.
For sure. I think there's an important point there too. I like that idea of utilizing it, in certain areas in the red zone, because also as you're breaking down an opponent, you start to see where his break points are, right? It's easy to say, well, these are the zones we look at, but I think a lot of times you still have to consider, we might say this is, the high red zone, et cetera. And in this area, they're going to do this. Where do they start to change? And I think that if you have a funky formation, that point where maybe you want to keep them out of a pressure situation is a good time to use it. I was just writing a little bit of an article for the defensive side on adjustments, and in that I made the point that, offensive guys are going to look at those situations where they know when they hit this area of the field, you're going to become a pressure team. That's a great opportunity for them to use tempo, but it's also a great opportunity for them to use these formations that are going to knock you out of your call and get you into your adjustment for that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Situations, that leads us into that conversation. I know you saw quite a few things that are teachable moments here from a situational standpoint. So let's talk about some of those. And I think the first one you mentioned to me was 3rd and short.
Yeah, just having a really good plan for 3rd and short, which obviously you want to have a great plan for 3rd and short every week you play. But I thought the University of Washington coach DeBoer had a couple great 3rd and short answers. They had one. It was actually an empty quarterback was under center. They had a kind of a tight end wing player on each side, and then a couple receivers, and I think maybe the running back was tucked in as a wing. Got up hard counted it, didn't get anybody to jump, looked over at the sideline like they were going check with me, and all of a sudden the quarterback was back under center, and they sneak it and get the first down on 3rd and 1. So I thought that was just kind of a unique little wrinkle, which I think typically you probably see a little bit later in the season once they've seen that you're someone that likes to quarterback sneak a little bit. But again, it was just a great little wrinkle to get the defense off balance. And then they also had just it was a 4th and 1, 4th and 2 play early in the game. They got the 22 personnel. They had an inline tight end on both sides with a tight end wing player to the left as well. And then they had their single receiver out to the right, brought him in fly motion as just kind of window dressing, and then had a zone strong play with still a backside tight end, the slicer going backside as well. So just a lot of surface covered up, plus the slicer, plus the fly action going, which, again, week 1, that's a pretty tough defend there on 4th and 1, 4th and 2, and they're able to pop a gap and hit it for a big play. So, a couple really nice situational answers there.
Let me ask you about that 22 personnel. Were they?
Yeah.
I didn't see that game. Were they under center for that, or were they in the gun?
They were in the gun, and I believe it was pistol.
Yeah, that's the fly. Talk about that for a second. The fly motion definitely is something that adds misdirection. Fly and then orbit motion, and some people call it ghost motion. I know it has a lot of names, but the motion where somebody goes behind the quarterback.
Yep.
I think those start to add misdirection, pull people, make people play honest. I know. Trying to think. I think we were playing Wilmington, and when you look at it from a surface standpoint, it looked like Wilmington was just in a 9-man box. Their safeties were up tight. They're playing too high, but I mean, they're under 10 yards, and we're running the ball with, I think we were using orbit motion at the time and pistol. And I remember the head coach saying, "Why are you running the ball? They're in a 9-man box." Well, I'm holding them with the action of the fly, and I'm holding him on all that. The quarterback's coming out the other way, and the way we would run our pistol is he was reversing out of it anyway. So now we have this very wing tee type of misdirection. Those safeties, especially if you align them tight, and I thought if they put them a little bit deeper, it might have changed things because those guys could see, okay, he doesn't have the ball and then fill the middle. But when they're down that tight, they really can't do that. So we really turned it, what looked like a 9-man front into a 3-2 box and just ran the football on them with no safety support.
Mm. Yeah, and I think anytime you bring, especially fly or like you said, orbit motion, you may see a loaded box, and then you may see 5 players make an adjustment, and all of a sudden it's not a 9-man front because only 6 guys are fitting the run on the snap of the ball. And now you get that advantage back. And then it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier with empty, unbalanced, all the different things, those wrinkles in week 1. Defensively, you don't get an opportunity to coach everything in camp. And you may be in a situation where you play an offense every day in your program that runs fly motion, unbalanced, does a bunch of stuff. Or you may be a team that goes against a pretty basic 10 personnel spread every day where you don't get a lot of that. So, it just comes back to you're trying to do as many things to test that defensive coaching staff and that defensive discipline early in seasons to see, hey, have they covered this situation? Have they covered fly motion? Have they covered the orbit motion? And test their ability to build a disciplined defense that says, okay, these are our fitters and we know we're going to adjust with our safety. And 4th and 1, we have the discipline to ignore that motion and just go fit it, or is it the latter? So, all that stuff early in the season is really tough.
Yeah, the timing on that is important too. So while I say it's a great way to add misdirection, understand that if you are going to add that to your offense, there's definitely going to be some time on task. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve on when do we snap the ball, where does the guy get to, and then the variations maybe in the different people who you have doing that. So fly motion, the misdirection still has to time up very well. And I know taking that into consideration, having at one point run a ton of fly, having learned it from Mark Speckman, who's now at UC Davis, was that the timing is so important. So that's where I tended to use, if I wanted to get misdirection, orbit motion, and getting him behind was a little bit more forgiving on the timing of it, and we could time it up better without, especially if, for us, we're in the pistol all the time. So if you're in gun, definitely more difficult on the timing because of the speed of the snap, all those different things. So I don't think that just saying, well, this is a great answer, we're going to throw in some fly this week or orbit is always, again, you have to spend the time on it too to make it right with the timing and the misdirection.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We do need to break some news here. Mark Speckman, the guru D-Fly, is actually now the offensive coordinator at Clarion University.
Okay.
So,
I missed that one. I did not know he moved. I haven't talked to him in a while, so it's good to hear he's running an offense again. I know he was the running backs coach at UC Davis.
Yep. Yeah. Well, as a West Coast D3 guy myself, his reputation precedes itself with everything he was doing up in the Pacific Northwest with all the fly stuff there. It's oh boy, I'm blanking on the Oregon school that he was at. Help me out.
Willamette.
There we go. The beautiful Willamette Valley. But no, I'm with you. That's a great wrinkle as well. And always stressing that the quarterbacks get that ball snapped early, because if they're going full speed, they're gonna, that fly is gonna hit. So trust it and get that ball snapped. And I do think the challenge with it though, offensively, and it helps if you have a quarterback that can run and you can get to some power read stuff. But the fly actions, window dressing is great, but how are you getting the ball at the perimeter to force teams to continue to honor it throughout the year?
100%. And I know I interrupted you there to go off on that little tangent. We were talking about the short yardage there, and I know you had another thought on that.
Yeah, no, touched on the quarterback sneak piece, and as well as the heavier package with some flash with window dressing. I mean, I think those are really good answers. And also the other thing that showed up a lot this week was a lot of pin pull, crack toss, kind of 3-by-1 bunch stuff that I thought some teams did a really good job of getting to. And now you're not just running do-over zone weak up the middle all the time on third and short. You got a chance to get the ball to the perimeter in a little bit of space.
Yeah, I like pin pull for a lot of different reasons. I know when we first installed it, and I don't like doing this, we messed around just slightly in camp to look at it and knew we needed to look at it more in this particular year, but we wanted to use it maybe in week 4 against an odd front team, and it provided us some great answers and became part of our offense. What I like about pin pull, though, if you are in that situation where you say, hey, I need something on the perimeter, I do think it's not as difficult to put that in if for whatever reason you didn't cover it in camp. I think it's a scheme that, as long as you can understand the rules, most of the time you have those blocks in there anyway where your guys are going to pull and get out front, or you're going to down block on somebody. So from that standpoint, it's much easier than saying, oh, we're going to put in inside zone this week.
Yep. No, it's hard to install wide zone in week 5. A little easier to get pin and pull going, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it is a good answer to a lot of different things. I like it too, and we used it quite a bit out of that bunch, right? The bunch sets, just because now you really get some angles on guys who can come down on the inside, and if you got some athletic linemen getting those pullers out there, now you're running just like a buck sweep, right? You're running the ball in that alley. It's not necessarily going to get all the way out to the sideline. It's not a junior high toss play, but you're going to create an alley there where you have that wall to the inside and you have guys kicking out.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a great play that mirrors up to zone weak or power or whatever you're trying to get in that B gap, C gap area to your 3-by-1 kind of bunch set with the off tight end. And now all of a sudden the ball's out on the perimeter when people start anchoring down and really trying to defend that area. So that's definitely a good answer to have in your back pocket. It's
something too, and Jeff Mullen brought this up last week on OC Office Hours, that it relieves some of the pressure on your lineman, right? And he was talking specifically, about a center as an example who's got a reach on a zone play and is always reaching, and you give him a block back play, it feels for him like a playoff, right? Because it's not as difficult for him, and essentially that's what you get with a pin pull play, is that you do ease things up a little bit for your offensive lineman. And if we're talking about this time of year, again, getting your guys into a rhythm, trying to make it easier for them with a play call, that this isn't a bad thing to have in your menu of plays to run, especially here early season.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head when you said it gives you an answer to expecting your center to consistently win on that front side zone block. Now you get a chance to switch it up, and especially if it's a matchup maybe that he hasn't been consistently winning throughout the game, you don't want to have to go there on third and short and watch him get pressed by a really, really good interior D lineman.
So to wrap things up here, Coach, we've got the end-of-game situations, 2-minute. I know there's a lot of exciting games here that have come down to the last minute of the game. One last night, which was just insane the way that game went.
Yep.
But you definitely saw some things in the 2-minute situation. I know one of those you picked up on. You said you were seeing the score and you watched a little bit of FIU Bryant.
Yeah, flipped over there. I think ESPN3 probably got me there, but they were in a dogfight and they had to go down and score at the end of the game. And, you know, I don't know how much confidence they had offensively at that point, but they had to find a way. And credit to that coaching staff. They get on the plus side of the field, and all of a sudden they go 3-by-1 into the boundary and put their best player to the field. And Bryant's playing kind of a quarters look, so they're now setting that nickel into the boundary. And you can tell they're just a little bit uncomfortable playing corner out there by himself. The safety's out there, but does he have to take 3 vertical coming from the far side? And FIU ends up hitting a couple out routes to number 1 to the field, and just going back to a lot of what we talked about, putting that defense in a situation that they probably did not cover in all of spring and all of fall through no fault to the coaching staff. But, 2-minute drill 3-by-1 in the boundary isn't something that most of us think to cover. And so all of a sudden, when they really need to find an answer or find a way to get a win for FIU with that new staff, and Bryant's not one you want to drop in your opener, all of a sudden they came up with, I thought, just a really, really good answer, which allowed them to get down in field goal range, kick a field goal, and get to overtime where they found a way to get a win. So props to Coach McIntyre and his staff.
The 2-minute situation certainly requires a lot of practice. And I know particularly at the high school level, maybe you don't get to it as much as you want early season or in camp. But I believe it's something you have to have it every week. We would always do it. Our last practice of the week with shells on at the college level. On a Thursday, it would be the last thing we did on a Thursday. It was a competitive period. There was no tackling. Pretty much on the line. Though these guys always didn't listen. It was get into your rush lanes and then shut it down. And for the offensive line is, you get them stopped, you make your punch, shut it down. So you don't have the high contact stuff going, but you're operating with your receivers and full procedures. We would put time on the clock. We would use the chains. We would use the guys as the officials spotting the ball, etc. But there's a lot to it, right? There's usually, for us, it was a set of plays where we would run so we could get those repped every single week. Every now and then throw one in, like you said, that's going to just blow the tendencies, but also the kind of the procedures of how you handle it in that situation. But for you, what do you feel are the best ways to approach the 2-minute, both in terms of install, especially early season, and then getting it repped?
Yeah, I think that it always helps if you are a tempo no huddle team, right? Because that takes a lot of stress off you as far as you don't have to build out 8-play menu with some code words because you're typically a huddle wristband team. So if you are a huddle wristband team, you really need to prioritize it. But the other part is you just need to make sure you have a plan as a coordinator and get into that menu of 8 to 10 plays max where, okay, we can get these things called and get them lined up if we are in a really Mayday type of, hey, we only got probably 3 or 4 snaps and we have no time to waste, or if you're in a little more of a controlled 2-minute drill, regardless, these are the 6 to 8 plays that I know give us a chance. And I don't think it's about being perfect and having necessarily the perfect call, but it's about putting some good options out there for your guys and also giving them plays that they know and they can hear and line up fast and get a ball snap to give your players a chance to go make a play at the end of the game.
I know one thing I liked, would love to hear your thoughts on it, but not initially. When we put the initial stuff in camp in the early season, we would call it. But as we would, especially maybe around week 3, 4, definitely by mid-season when we got into those, I really liked to let the quarterbacks call it. Now, I was still going to call it in the game, but I liked to see what they would do and where their comfort level was. What did they really feel good about in those situations? It would tell me a little bit as a play caller too. It actually would tell me a lot that, hey, he didn't touch this play at all, right? We may not want to call that one yet, and let's find out why though. But as far as handling the mental part for the quarterback, that's something we would do with that. Anything else you do to train them or get them used to these procedures?
Yeah, I really like what you just said. I think that's great. I think different personality types at quarterback kind of gravitate to it differently. You probably have the kid that would like to call the whole game and says, hey, coach, I'm good. I got it from here, versus the guy that if you say, hey, go ahead and call it, he barely will come up with a play call. But especially if it's the first group, I think that's awesome as far as giving him a chance to take some ownership. And exactly what you said, he'll just lead you to the calls he likes the best. No, I mean, I think the one thing I would touch on is trying to have some sort of movement pass out of that package, especially if you get in a situation where you can't take a sack, but you have a couple plays to burn. I thought that kind of showed up in the Utah game at the end. I think it was second down where they end up throwing they call snag to the field there, and it definitely a very valid football call, and it didn't just quite work out, but you get on a movement type of pass where your quarterback has a play or two to burn. Now I think he's under a little less stress of trying to make that read and throw from the pocket. But I think it comes back to what you said, just trying to make sure that you get your reps in a quality situation. The 2-minute drill, the one thing I like that you talked about is making sure that the pass rush is minimized, because I also think for the defensive side of the ball, you go live 2-minute drill and the D-line's just kicking the O-line's butt, and all of a sudden they feel like they're doing a great job of covering people even if they aren't.
Right. And
because the ball's not getting out, and then all of a sudden you get into that game situation week 1 and that D-line's gassed at the end of the game and there is no pass rush, and now you got to cover like crazy back there. So I thought that was a great little nugget that you tossed in there.
Last thing I want to cover, and this came up last night, and as I thought about it, it's a situation that I never coached. I think it's one you need to coach at the high school and college level, is the chains move. You've gained that first down, but there's 1 second on the clock, so on the whistle, that ball is snapped. I never had a procedure for it. I never covered it in last plays. We would certainly practice last plays, but I don't recall ever talking to my players about that situation with knowing there's 1 second on the clock. When the whistle blows, we don't have time for cadence. Because if we do, the play's over. So it was that situation. Now, there was a whole bunch of discussion going on from the coaching staffs with each other, with their players as they were reviewing that play, and then FSU ended up taking a timeout. But I really thought they would snap the ball on the whistle. Has that been something you ever faced, and how did you prepare your teams for it?
Yeah, that's a great point. I just wrote that note down. I think if you can get to that situation and cover it, but I also think it's really important that just in general you talk about winding the clock off the when being ready to snap a ball when in situations when they're going to wind the clock on the whistle once it gets marked for play, and just going over that situation and practicing it where your guys are comfortable getting the ball snapped almost immediately after it gets wound. Because the worst thing is when you're sitting there screaming at your guys that they need to be ready because everybody's relaxed because the clock stopped and they got a couple seconds break, and then all of a sudden they wind the clock and you burn 6-7 seconds while your quarterback stands the last scrimmage. So, I think one thing I saw, visited Cal a couple of years ago, Coach Wilcox's staff, he had a spreadsheet of situations that he would cover during camp in kind of nightly meetings. And it covered everything from the kickoff going on the sideline and putting 1 foot out of bounds and picking it up. So now it's a kickoff out of bounds type of situation. And this is where I think as a coach, you want to try and be organized as possible, keep a laundry list of those situations. And so now you get a chance to at least address them throughout the course of camp, and hopefully you kind of introduce some of these concepts which may pay big dividends at some point during the year.
Yeah, for sure. In addressing that situation, just thinking through, okay, how would I handle this? And I'm speaking to coaches out there. I highly suggest this becomes part of your last plays scenario. I know everybody usually includes those each week and practices those, but this situation where there is, I don't know what it is. If it's 1 second on the clock, 2, 3, I think you can say go and still get it snapped. But having your guys really ready, not moving around, everybody gets up there and gets sets, and it's that last play. You probably have to have a code word for that lets them know when we hear the whistle, it's snapped and we're going. I don't see any other way. And you got to be careful with that. I mean, your guys, if they mess it up, right, procedurally, especially your center, the game's over. They're going to run the clock. The game's over. So it's something I would practice. I would have a code word for it. How often is it going to come up? It might not even come up in the season, but you know what? When it does, it's a chance to win the ball game or lose the ball game, and you always want your guys prepared for those situations, regardless.
Yeah, you hope you give them a chance. So you just created the one word whistle play. Everybody line up, and we're going for vert, and nobody moves till the ball gets snapped, and then we're going. And let's go try and make a play to win it. But no, I think that's spot on, and that's also one of the really, really good talking points that staffs can be having today and tomorrow in their staff meetings. Hey, what'd you see this weekend? What situations came up that maybe we haven't touched on as a program that we need to make sure we're ready for this week, heading into week 2?
They're always out there. I said it before. I think it was either in a podcast or an article from the movie quote. Every given Sunday, the inches we need are all around us, right? We have to find those situations and make sure we're prepared for them and not surprised when they come up. Absolutely.
That's the name of the game right there. Just trying to shave off every little inch and trim the fat to a point where when it adds up at the end of the night, you're in the victory circle, not saying what if.
Coach, well, I really appreciate you taking the time here with us. As I said before, would certainly love to have you back on the podcast again. And guys, once we finish up here, I will share some links in show notes to Coach's resources. He's an open book and does an incredible job with his offense, so I'll share those as well. But Coach, again, thank you for the time, and I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Keith, my pleasure, and I would love to do it. Thanks.